I beg to differ. I think they will get away with it. I think it's entirely cynical, and I think they will largely get away with it. What have they done? They've alienated the pensioners who didn't vote for them anyway.
Keir Starmer stood confidently in front of the cameras, seemingly ready for anything. But no one expected what came next. Rod Liddle, as sharp as ever, tore into Starmer live on TV, openly criticising his decision to cut the winter fuel allowance. This wasn't just a typical policy debate, it felt like watching a slow-motion train wreck as the anger of abandoned pensioners began to boil over. Even Labour MPs started turning their backs on their leader. The question loomed, how long could Starmer hold it together before the cracks within his own party finally broke him? What was clear, though, was that 9 out of 10 pensioners would lose their winter fuel payment, up to £300, during the most challenging time of the year for millions of them. The chaos began with Labour's controversial decision to cut the winter fuel allowance, a move that sent shockwaves through the country. This allowance, worth around £1.4 billion, is a relatively minor expenditure in government spending. Yet instead of seeing it as an essential lifeline for vulnerable pensioners, Labour under Starmer's leadership chose to press forward with the cuts. This decision sparked outrage, particularly among older citizens who depend on this allowance to keep their homes warm during harsh winters. Cutting it wasn't just a financial choice, it felt deeply heartless. Upon returning to Westminster, Starmer faced an immediate backlash from his own MPs, many of whom struggled to support the decision. The reaction from within Labour was swift and intense. 50 Labour MPs abstained from the vote, unwilling to openly oppose the party but equally hesitant to endorse such an unpopular decision. Only one MP had the courage to vote against it. Even Labour heavyweight John McDonnell couldn't stay silent. He delivered a scathing speech, condemning Starmer's leadership for its indifference to the struggles of pensioners. To McDonnell and many others, this wasn't simply about saving a bit of money, it was about punishing those who didn't vote Labour, an act of political retribution. Starmer, McDonnell suggested, was focused on rewarding those who supported him and stepping on the heads of those who didn't. Rod Liddle's criticism didn't hold back either. He tore into Starmer, dissecting his decisions one by one. This wasn't a gentle critique, it was brutal and, in Liddle's view, well-deserved. He made it clear that Starmer's move wasn't just a harmless political misstep, it was a calculated choice. Liddle accused Starmer of abandoning pensioners, a group that often leans toward the Conservatives, and argued that Starmer felt comfortable doing so because they weren't his voters. According to Liddle, Starmer's strategy was a clear example of pork barrel politics, rewarding the groups that kept him in power while ignoring those who didn't. Starmer's decision to cut the winter fuel allowance wasn't accidental, it was calculated and deeply cynical. Imagine being a pensioner, barely making it through winter, huddled in a cold house and relying on the allowance to keep warm. Then, suddenly, you find out that Labour, the party supposedly standing up for the vulnerable, has slashed it. The fury is understandable. These aren't people living in luxury, they're elderly citizens, many of whom have worked all their lives, now left to freeze because someone in Westminster deemed their needs unimportant. Liddle painted Starmer as entirely disconnected from reality, calling the decision a betrayal. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a deliberate act of turning his back on the elderly. Liddle pointed out the political short-sightedness of such a move. While it's true that many pensioners might not have voted for Labour in the last election, alienating an entire demographic is a dangerous game. These people vote, they talk, and some have historically supported Labour. But after this, who could blame them for feeling abandoned? For many, this isn't just a matter of a few pounds lost, it's a matter of survival. And Starmer and his team, it seemed, had missed the gravity of that entirely.
But John McDonnell, for example, big Labour figure, okay, he's currently suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party because he will not skip to the mighty leader Starmer's beat. But he made a big speech just saying, you know, this is not what people came into the Labour Party for.
Here's where things get bizarre. Rod Liddle, the Conservative firebrand, actually found himself agreeing with John McDonnell, a man so far left he's practically an old-school socialist. Just think about that for a second, a staunch Conservative and a die-hard Labour socialist on the same page. That alone tells you how flawed Starmer's decision was. Even Liddle, who usually spends his time criticising figures like McDonnell, couldn't help but nod along in agreement. When someone as ideologically opposed to McDonnell as Liddle starts to sympathise with him, it's clear that something has gone seriously wrong. McDonnell came out swinging, delivering a fiery speech condemning the winter fuel cuts. He didn't hold back, calling out Starmer for what he saw as a cold, calculated move targeting the wrong people. McDonnell's speech struck a chord, especially when he spoke about pensioners who had contributed to society for decades, now being left out in the cold. It was one of those moments where even his usual opponents had to acknowledge his point. And Liddle, not usually a fan of McDonnell, found himself in agreement with McDonnell's brutal takedown of Starmer. That's how far off the rails this decision had gone.
McDonnell, and indeed Andy MacDonald, who are voting against or abstaining, it's really, really good Labour MPs like Rosie Duffield.
Yeah.
Rod Liddle's reaction was one of disbelief. Here's a man who has built his career dismantling left-wing figures like John McDonnell. Yet now, he found himself siding with McDonnell against Starmer. Liddle even joked that he hated Starmer so much at that moment that he was agreeing with McDonnell, a sentence he probably never thought he'd say. But that's just how badly Starmer has bungled this situation. He's managed to unite people who usually sit on opposite ends of the political spectrum, all against him. Liddle didn't stop there. He went straight for the jugular, tearing into Starmer's entire track record since becoming Labour leader, and it wasn't a pretty sight. Liddle pointed out Starmer's inconsistencies, accusing him of trying to appease everyone except those who need his support most. For instance, while Starmer pushed for significant pay raises for junior doctors, many of whom are already earning six figures, he offered nothing for pensioners who depend on the winter fuel allowance to get through the cold months. To Liddle, it seemed as though Starmer was playing favourites, prioritising unions and the public sector while ignoring vulnerable citizens. This alienation of pensioners has cost Starmer heavily. He has managed to isolate a sizable portion of the electorate, including people who might not typically vote Labour but whose goodwill he's now lost entirely. Liddle called this decision a disaster, the nail in the coffin for Starmer's leadership. The fallout has been catastrophic, with around 50 Labour MPs abstaining from the vote, unwilling to openly oppose the party but unwilling to support such an unpopular policy either. This is a significant crack in what was once a solid party foundation. Under Starmer, that foundation now seems to be crumbling, his grip on control slipping fast. Liddle didn't miss a beat in calling this decision what it was, politically suicidal. The worst part? Starmer and Rachel Reeves, who backed the policy, seemed completely oblivious to the storm brewing. They either didn't see it coming or thought they could weather it without facing any real consequences. This miscalculation of the public's reaction, and the reaction within their own party, reveals a troubling disconnect from reality. Long-time Labour MPs, people who have been loyal to the party for years, are now openly questioning Starmer's leadership. This isn't just a policy failure, it's a full-blown PR disaster. By refusing to backtrack, Starmer appears to be doubling down on a bad decision, leaving everyone, including his party, wondering how long it will be before this situation fully implodes. So, what do you think? Has Starmer's decision alienated Labour's base beyond repair? Share your thoughts in the comments below.